gives us the discourse, avoid the snare of independent thinking.
We live today in a world that is prone toward independent thinking, in a world where many people find it popular, and I will go so far as to say some find it fashionable to feel that no one should tell them what to do, direct their thinking or their actions, especially if this authority or if this person who interferes tries to defy what they want to do. For example, as we passed through the decades of the 80s and 90s, we saw clear evidence of what the Bible foretold for the last days. Remember in 2 Timothy 3, it said, in the last days men would be lovers of themselves. And because of this widespread spirit of self-love, people were willing to disobey and defy even the supreme authority. Jehovah God, choose to be independent of what he says is good for mankind. And now here we are at the beginning of what they've termed a new millennium. And this spirit of self-love that characterized the latter part of the 20th century has become full-blown. Now, we can tell this in a number of ways, and in particular by some of the expressions that people began to use in the 20th century that are still popular today. For example, you hear people say things like, well, you have to love yourself, do your own thing, look out for number one, be assertive, don't judge. If it feels good, do it. You do your thing, I'll do mine. You do you, and I'll do me. Take me as I am. Be your own man. Take control, free will, self-expression, strut your stuff. Now, what do all of these expressions say about the people who use them, these creeds that they live by? Basically, they're declaring they're a law unto themselves. No one tells me what to do. I think what I want. I do what I want. And that's sort of the popular thinking today. But as I asked you about the other evening, we raised the question, since this idea that each one should be able to make up his own mind with regard to morals or other conduct, we raised the question, has it helped mankind? Has the world become a better place with people doing their own thing, making their own decisions, even defying what the Creator says is good for people? Well, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take your Bible and open to Romans chapter 1, and I want you to find verses 28 through 32. And I want you to compare what you see written here with what we see going on around us today. And based upon this text, you will be able to answer the question of whether or not mankind, being independent in thought, independent even from what the Creator says, has made the world a better place. Are people better off making decisions for themselves? Notice in Romans chapter 1, Paul describing some individuals from his time, he says, and just as they did not approve of holding God in accurate knowledge, God gave them up to a disapproved mental state to do the things not fitting. Filled as they were with all unrighteousness, wickedness, covetousness, badness, being full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malicious disposition, being whisperers. That's people who talk about you, but they don't want you to know that they're talking about you, so they whisper on you. But then notice the next one, verse 30, backbiters. Now, they talk about you, and they don't care if you know. They just put it out there to hurt. But interestingly, he says they were also haters of God, insolent, haughty, self-assuming, inventors of injurious things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, false to agreements, having no natural affection, merciless. Although these know full well the righteous decree of God, that those practicing such things are deserving of death, they not only keep on doing them, but also consent with those practicing them. Now, friends, see, that's the picture. This is the result of people being a law to themselves, being independent in thought. This is the result of people defying the Creator in thought. Now, as you looked over that list, did you see good results? Are people better off doing their own thing? But now, interesting, I don't know if you got the setup or not when Paul was talking about the negative fruitage, but what put people in the state where they were murderers and backbiters and insolent and all these other nasty things that he described there? What was the core? How did they get into that condition? Look at verse 28 carefully. Look at it again. Notice Paul starts off his description by saying, and just as they did not approve of holding God in accurate knowledge, God gave them up to a disapproved mental state to do the things not fitting. You get it? In other words, he said they had accurate knowledge of what God wanted, but they didn't approve of that. They didn't want to hold to that. They wanted to do their thing. So what did it say? God said, fine, go do your thing. And when he gave men permission to go do their thing, or as he called it there, to do what was in a disapproved mental state, did you see what happened? Oh, they became filled with wickedness, covetousness, badness, envy. Well, do you look around the world today? What is the world full of today? Those same basic things. And you know why? Because people today do not approve of holding God in accurate knowledge. They want to do their thing. They want to think their thoughts and go their way. And sadly, some are as brazen as this. Look back at verse 32. He said, although these know full well the righteous decree of God, that those practicing such things are deserving of death, they not only keep on doing them, but also consent with those practicing them. I know God says that if you do this, he's going to put us to death, but I don't care. I want to do my thing, and you know what? You should do yours too. That's the thinking of people back there, and look at the results. It's the thinking that characterizes people today. So we ask the question, has it helped them? Obviously not. And that's what's intriguing, and that's the basis for our discussion this evening. The evidence is overwhelming that people don't do very well when they go off doing what they want to do. And yet individuals continue to do it. They still defy all logic and all common sense, and they go against what God says every day. They know full well that they will suffer penalties. They know full well that they're going to be disciplined and nothing good can come from it. And yet mankind seems bent on following a course contrary to what God says. Have you ever wondered why? Why are people that way? You can blame it to some extent on imperfection. One of our recent magazines said you can even call it to some extent ignorant. But the evidence is overwhelming that there's something more sinister afoot. The Bible really makes it clear that the world of mankind today is under the influence of an invisible spirit creature. You know his name. We call him Satan, the devil. And the devil causes people to do or to go against what they know full well to be God's righteous decrees, only to reap negative fruitage. But how is he able to get people to do that? How is he able to get people to go against what they know is going to hurt them? Well, interestingly, we get an idea by opening to the book of Genesis, chapter 3. I asked you to look over that the other evening. Did anybody get to look at that? All right, as we read through this, what we're interested in is how does this devil work? And when we finish our analysis, we will be able to see that what happened back then is much the same way he operates today, thus helping us to avoid his snare or trap. He wants us to think independent of God, just as he has other individuals doing. But he got our first parents to do so. Notice Genesis 3, the opening expression in verse 1 says, now the serpent proved to be the most cautious of all the wild beasts of the field that Jehovah God had made. So it began to say to the woman. Now let me stop you right there, because right away we're introduced to an idea that you and I know can't be true. Verse 1 says, it, that is the serpent, began to speak. Now we know that snakes don't talk. You and I know that. But who is it that doesn't know that? Or at least she doesn't understand or discern right now that what's really happening with this serpent is that this invisible spirit creature is manipulating this serpent, making it appear to be speaking. Now, remember the illustration in one of our publications, much like a ventriloquist does with a dummy. It makes it appear that it's speaking when it's really not. See, Eve is not aware of this invisible spirit creature. You and I know about him, but she doesn't know that. So as far as she's concerned, it That is, the serpent begins to speak. Now that's significant in another sense too, because of the way the verse started off. Some have wondered why verse 1 starts off with this expression, now the serpent proved to be the most cautious of all the wild beasts of the field that Jehovah God had made. Why does the Bible say that the serpent was the most cautious of all the animals? I mean, let's think about it. Aren't there animals that are as cautious as serpents? For example, have you ever tried to sneak up on a deer? You ever tried to walk up unannounced on a rabbit? Or even a kitty cat, for that matter. There are a number of animals that are as cautious and maybe even more cautious than serpents. But what you must understand is that just as this woman believes that it is speaking, this must be her observation that of all the wild beasts of the field that Jehovah has made, this one is the most cautious. This is Eve's point of view that's being presented here, the woman's perspective. So as she looked over the animals and based upon what she saw, she felt that this was the most cautious one. But now follow. As she observed the serpent, guess who was observing her? Observe the serpent. So as he watched her reach conclusions about the serpent, he says, you know, I believe I've got something there that I can work with in connection with this woman. She believes that this one is special, so I'm going to make it speak. Now, when it speaks, what does it say? Look at the B part of the verse. It said, is it really so that God said you must not eat from every tree of the garden? In other words, he said, I can't believe my cautious ears. You know what I heard? I heard that God made all those trees and then said you can't eat from them. Is that really so? Now, he must have known that Eve knew what God said. But you might have to ask the question, why did he ask it? You mean God made all those and you can't eat from any of them? Well, notice how she comes right to God's defense in verse number 2. At this, the woman said to the serpent, of the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat. But as for the eating of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, God has said, you must not eat from it. No, you must not touch it, that you do not die. So notice he said, in essence, no, you got it all backwards. He didn't make the trees and say we can't. He said we may eat. That's what God said. And he said, there is one, according to Eve, and it's in the middle of the garden. Now that one he did say, don't eat from that. In fact, interestingly, have you ever paid close attention to what Eve said with regard to God's expression? Look back at that verse again, verse 3. It says, but as for the eating of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, God has said, you must not eat from it. No, you must not touch it, that you do not die. Now, suppose I told you this from this platform this evening, that what Eve said God said is not what God said. Have you ever read what God said versus what Eve said he said? It's different. And if you don't believe me, you have your Bible open there, Genesis. Just look across the page if you have this regular BI 12 version. But find Genesis 2:16. Now let's read what God said and then compare it with what Eve said he said, and notice that there's a discrepancy. Genesis 2:16 reads, and Jehovah God also laid this command upon the man. From every tree of the garden you may eat. She got that part right. We may eat. But as for the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat from it, for in the day you eat from it, you will positively die. Now, God's command revolved around eating. Don't eat. And yet you read in Genesis 3:3 that when Eve repeated God's command, she said you must not eat from it, and then she added, no, you must not touch it. So Eve said God said don't touch it. God said don't eat from it. So my question is, well, where did she get that from that you couldn't touch the tree? Now, you know where she got it from. There was only one other human there, right? She got it from Adam, from her God-appointed head the one set there to legislate her thinking in terms of what was right, what was God's decree, and Adam wanted to safeguard and protect his wife, so he told her, don't touch it. See, they're having their family discussion or family study like we have today. I can see it there in Eden, and I'm sure you can too if you picture it. They're sitting there, and he says to her, baby, boo, what you like, boo? Everybody in Cleveland called their mate boo. I don't know what that's all about. But whatever he called her, he said, baby, he says, look, God said don't eat from that tree, but to be on the safe side, don't even touch it. If you don't touch it, you can't eat from it. And she could view that as coming from God because she recognized that what he said was in harmony with God's plainly stated law. Now, interestingly, the devil isn't really interested in Adam's restrictions on his wife, because if you look at his reply through the serpent at the end of that verse, verse 4, I should say, you'll notice that he says to the woman, it says, at this the serpent said to the woman, you positively will not die. For God knows that in the very day of your touching, he didn't even deal with that touching thing. But he knew that God had said, don't eat. So he says, no, in the very day of your eating from it, your eyes are bound to be open, and you're bound to be like God, knowing good and bad. Now, here's a question for you, Hayden. When the devil tells this woman now that if she eats from this tree, she's going to be like God, knowing good and bad, is he telling her what's going to happen if you eat is you're going to learn that there's a difference between right and wrong. You're going to learn that there's good and there's bad, and choices have to be made. Is that what he's telling her? Yeah, you're right. No, couldn't be. That's what the ministers of Christendom want you to believe. See, Adam and Eve were these two naive people running around the Garden of Eden. They didn't know anything. They ate from the tree, and their eyes were open, and they knew good and bad. And that's the furthest thing from the truth. How do we know? Well, because the evidence shows that Eve already knew the difference between good and bad. Because she just said, see, I can eat from all of those. There's one in the middle. I'm not supposed to touch it, and I'm not supposed to eat from it. She knew right, she knew wrong, she knew good, she knew bad. So he's not telling her here, you're going to learn the difference between the two. She already knew. So what's he talking about then? Get the sense of it. Notice his expression in verse 5 is that your eyes are bound to be open, and you're bound to be, notice, like God, knowing good and bad. See, Eve knew good and bad, but she didn't know it like God knew it. Question. Who tells Jehovah God what's good and bad? Answer. Nobody. He's God. He tells everybody else what's good and bad. See, he looks at something, he says, you know what? I like that. That's good. And I want everybody to do that. He'll look at another situation. He says, oh, that's bad. I don't like that. And I want everybody to stay away from it. He decides what's good and what's bad, and he sets standards. Up to this point, who's been telling Eve what's good and what's bad? See, you got a husband telling her what she can't touch. You got God telling her what she can't eat. So the devil says, you know, you need some liberation from this oppression. So here's what you do. You eat from that tree, and you're going to become just like God. You're going to leapfrog past Adam, and you're going to get on a par with God, and you're going to make up your own mind and your own decisions. You'll be just like God. And as ridiculous as this promise is, do you know she believed it? He told her that she was going to rival God in her decision-making ability. You can be just like God. Decide for yourself, just like he does. If I can use a line from my fishing buddies, when she bit hard because she swallowed this promise hook, line, and sinker. I mean, she bit hard. How do you know that she bought? Ooh. How do you know she was caught? Because look at the first word in verse 6. You don't have to read the whole verse. The first word in verse 6, notice the transition, consequently. You ever read that word? Consequently. You know, if you give it a simple definition, it just means as a result of. But in this context, it's showing that a big change is about to take place. In fact, what I thought I would do at this point, I want to just illustrate for you, friends, consequently, so you can get the sense of what's about to happen here. I'm going to give 3 illustrations, one for the young ones, one for the ones in the middle, and then one for the ones a little bit older. All right, all are under 12. If you're under 12, show me. Raise your hand. Show me if you're under 12. 12 or under. Okay, we got some under 12s. I want you to listen to this because I want to make sure you understand consequently. Are you listening to me? Consequently. My mom told me to clean my room. I didn't clean my room. Consequently, she took my Game Boy. Consequently, I had to go to bed early tonight. Consequently, she says I can't go out of the house for a whole week. Consequently, I have to come straight home, do my homework with no TV. Consequently, big change. You understand consequently? You got it? Okay, I thought you might. All right, let me give it one to some not so young. Sometime our young adults get to the place where they're in love. Ain't nothing wrong with being in love. I'm in love. But the Bible warns young people, don't get along with a person of the opposite sex. Don't be by yourself. Don't get to this thing where you think you can operate without a chaperone. No, I didn't listen to that counsel. Consequently, in 9 months, I'm going to be somebody's mama. What do I know about being somebody's mama? I'm barely out of diapers myself. Consequently, I'm going to be somebody's daddy. What do I know about being a daddy to somebody? Consequently, I have a bad conscience now. I think I let Jehovah down. Consequently, what am I going to tell my parents? Consequently, I got to go talk to the elders. Consequently, the friends in the congregation are going to find out. Consequently. You young adults, you get consequently? What about some of us? We passed all that. We survived being in love. So we're a little bit further along. Well, the branch office through the faithful slave or representing the slave has said to us in publications and other things, he said, friends, don't get so busy with life, trying to make a living. Got to take care of my health. Got to get this for the kids. Got to do that. Those things have to be done. But don't get so preoccupied with trying to make it in these critical times that we neglect our spirituality. Don't fail to set aside a schedule for reading and studying God's Word. Don't allow things to keep you from the meetings. See, stay busy in the ministry. Please don't neglect your theocracy. Well, I didn't listen. Consequently, I got some doubts about the truth now. I don't even know if this is really the truth. Consequently, are we really in the last days? I mean, they said it was going to be over by now. You got to make it in this world. Consequently, why we keep going out to those? They heard it already. Consequently, we keep going to those meetings. They say the same old thing over and over. It's boring. Consequently. Is there anybody that doesn't understand consequently? Because I can give you 3 or 4 more if you don't have it. I think you get what we're saying. It's not just something is about to happen. A big shift. A big change in circumstances. Now follow. Go back up there to verse number 5. The devil tells this woman, your eyes are bound to be open. You're bound to be like God, knowing good and bad. Verse 6 says, consequently, the woman saw that the tree was good for food and that it was something to be longed for to the eyes. Yes, the tree was desirable to look upon. I have to stop you right there. What a false discovery this woman made. Look there in verse 6. It said she saw that the tree was good for food. You know what I say? I said, so what? That wasn't the issue. Was the tree good for food? Jehovah didn't say to Eve and Adam, look, don't stay away from that tree in the middle of the garden. Look, as I was creating, I got a little tired, and I got one in the middle. I just didn't quite get it right. I don't know what's wrong with it. So just stay away from it because it's not good for food. I just didn't get it right. There was nothing wrong. It was a tree. So when she found out that you could eat, it was like all the other trees in that it could produce food. What a false discovery. Jehovah never had an issue with whether the tree was good for food. I know people like that. They discover stuff and it's not even important. They think they found something. But nonetheless, she found this tree good for food, and it didn't hurt her. But if the tree was good for food, it was just like all the other trees, then why did Jehovah tell them to stay away from it? Why did he say don't eat from it? Friends, if you don't remember anything else, just remember this one point about the tree in the Garden of Eden. That tree represented one thing, and one thing only. That tree represented God's right to tell people what they could and couldn't do. It was visible, tangible proof that there's someone bigger and better than you, and I said no. And every time I look at that tree, I'll be reminded, oh, somebody bigger than me told me what to do. He didn't put it there to test them. I've heard people say he wanted to see what they were going to do. That's not what the Bible says. The Bible said he laid a command upon them. He's God. Don't eat from it. Just as surely today when he tells us don't commit fornication, he's not saying, now let me see what they're going to do. He says don't do it. End of story. So he put that tree there and told them not to eat from it. So when she discovered it was good for food, what a false discovery that was. But even more intriguing is the rest of the verse. Look at what it said, because after she found that it was good for food, notice she saw that it was something to be longed for to the eyes. Yes, the tree was desirable to look upon. Now, my question is, she'd seen that tree how many times before and had never had that effect on her before? She even knew where it was, in the middle of the garden. But somehow now when she looks at this tree, she sees something interesting. But let's be honest, friends. Trees don't have this effect on people. I mean, I've seen some good-looking trees in my time, and maybe you have too. But in all your good-looking tree seeing, did you ever see one that was, quote, something to be longed for to the eye? Did you ever see a tree like that? Oh, it's desirable to look upon. Oh, just let me look at it. You know trees don't affect people like that. So what this verse is describing is not the physical appearance of the tree. She'd seen that tree before. What it's talking about, remember the first word in the verse? Consequently. Now she sees something in this tree that she'd never seen before. It's come to represent something. And you know what it represents? Independence. I can be like God. I can make up my own mind. I'm tired of that man telling me what I can touch. I'm tired of God telling me what I can and can't eat. And as I said, as silly as that was, the verse continues, she began taking of its fruit and eating it. But now the next part of the verse is interesting because it says, afterwards, she gave some also to her henpecked husband when with her, and he began eating it. And see, I call him that on purpose because that's what he was. And we can prove it two ways. Number one, the evidence tells us that it had to be Adam who told this woman not to touch the tree. Because when she starts to quote, you'll notice that it's not in full quotes, but she says, God said, don't eat, don't touch. So she must have gotten that from Adam. So if he told her not to touch it, my first question is, well, then when she touched it, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you say, what have you done? We got to get this thing straightened out with Jehovah. We got to fix this. Why didn't you take the lead like you were supposed to do? But even if you can't go with that logic, if you look at what the verse says, you see it says afterward she gave some. if you look that up in the Hebrew, that means that she's dominating. She's taking the lead. She gave it to him. She says, I want you to eat it. And like a little whipped pup, he said, okay. And that man knew full well what God's righteous decree was concerning that tree. But he ate willingly, defying God's plainly stated law. Why are we interested in that little analysis of Genesis? Because it's the same devil today. Understand, brothers and sisters, he got two people in paradise who had the best of everything to somehow believe that what arrangement they had was oppressive, that they could do as well or better on their own, and they wanted freedom from it. How did he get them to do that? Because just as surely as you sit there, he's trying to take you. You're in spiritual paradise. We're the best fed people on the face of this earth. We have a hope second to none. We have the greatest God, and he wants you to believe that you can do better on your own. All I got to do is do this, and I'll be okay. How did he get it? We went through it, but did you get there? It was 3 steps to what he did to those people. Step 1. Look back at verse 1 again. Remember the B part of the verse? He approached her with the question. He said, is it really so that God said you must not eat from every tree of the garden? Now, he must have known that she knew the answer, and he must have known that she would give the answer. So the purpose of the question is not to see what she knows, but maybe just to raise some doubt in her mind about the possibility that maybe God isn't dealing with you fairly and upright. He does the same thing today with people, as he has people ask, you really got to go to all them meetings? You got to do all that study? Is that really so? I heard that you people don't never get to do this, and y'all don't have no fun. So he puts things out there. Now, obviously, we know the answer. But if you can just kind of plant the seed in the back of a person's mind, how come we don't? Why we got to go to all? What? See, if he can just get people thinking a little bit. All right, now, the second phase is important because first you raise some doubt. But now notice, according to verse 4, which we didn't really deal with in our analysis, this the serpent, that is the devil through the serpent, said to the woman, you positively will not die. That's a lie. I look around this earth today, I don't see Eve anywhere. You know why? Because she's dead. So when he told her she wasn't going to die, that was just a lie, is what that was. But interestingly, that's what he'll do to people today. First he raised some doubt, and then he finds a way to just outright lie to them. You know, if you miss those meetings, it's going to be okay. If you marry that man not in the truth, it'll work out. If you do this, if you do that, he just lies to people and gets it out there for them to believe that they'll be okay if they just defy what Jehovah says. Now, the third thing, though, is the most intriguing. Because if you look back at the part that we looked at some extent, verse 5, notice God knows. He took it off himself and put it on God. God knows that in the very day of your eating from it, your eyes are bound. That is sure, positive, to be opened, and you are bound to be like God, knowing good and bad. That's an empty promise. There was no way that these people were going to rival God in their decision-making ability. And he does the same thing to people today. He makes people believe that if they are independent of God in this matter, that they're going to be successful. If they defy Jehovah's thinking in this matter, they're going to be okay. They're not going to reap the consequences of going against his plainly stated laws. We see people rationalize and reason around God's laws all the time. And sometimes it happens right in the congregation. But it's the same devil today. In fact, interestingly, the Bible shows that what really happened to Eve, or the woman in particular, because Adam, let's just face it, Adam was just a fool. He rebelled against God. He knew fully well that what he was doing was wrong, and he was going to reap the consequences of it. But this woman was really under the guise that she could be successful. As silly as it is, she believed it. But do you know why she was deceived? Open your Bible to the book of Corinthians. I thought it was interesting what Paul had to say on this. In one book, he said that she was deceived, but in talking to the Corinthians, and remember the brothers in Corinth had all kind of internal problems within their congregation. They were taking each other to court and had all kind of internal things and tolerating immorality in the congregation. But at 2 Corinthians 11:4, Paul was so concerned about the brothers that he went back to Eden and he made this revelation. 11:3, I say 11:4. 2 Corinthians 11:3, he says, "But I am afraid that somehow, as the serpent seduced Eve by its cunning, your minds might be corrupted away from the sincerity and chastity that are due to Christ." Did you get it? What happened to Eve? Yes, she was deceived, but she was deceived through seduction. Friends, do you know what it means to be seduced? Interesting, if you look in the dictionary, the word seduced means to charm, to allure, to entice, to induce, to beguile, to win over, to make attractive. So what Paul is saying is that the devil made independence from God attractive. He made her believe, I'll be just as successful on my own. Oh, and he's doing the same thing to people today on a massive scale. As the Bible says, the whole world is sort of lying in his power. He's the ruler of the authority of the air. The Bible calls it the spirit of disobedience. In Ephesians chapter 2, it's just sort of out there. And I thought it was interesting that it likens his influence, the devil's influence, to air. Because think about air. You breathe it in, you breathe it out. Air has a certain authority over us. Without it, we would die. So we sort of have to have it. Well, what the devil has done symbolically is he sort of poisoned the spirit of thinking of people, the social interaction of people. You can do your own thing. Nobody should tell you what to do. You're two consenting adults. Nobody should legislate. They have all of these little things that they put out there that basically says you don't have to do what God says. Just do what you feel is right. And it's so popular today. But fortunately for us, we came out of that world. We came into God's arrangement. Jehovah saw us out there. Remember what Jesus said? And he began to pull us toward him. And are you grateful and thankful that Jehovah got you out of that world when you're out there lying and fornicating and stealing and murdering, hurting yourself, hurting your family, doing whatever? But see, you're in the truth. But being in the truth, does that mean that you don't have to worry about the spirit of independent thinking? Does that mean now I'm in the truth, so I don't have to worry about the devil trying to lure me away? Well, remember, Eve and Adam were in the truth. They were in paradise, just like we were in spiritual paradise. I often liken being in the truth to going into the no-smoking section of a restaurant. Maybe you've heard this illustration before, but I always get a kick out of Jehovah's Witnesses when they go to a restaurant here in Cleveland. In other states, you can't smoke in the restaurant, but in some restaurants here you still can. So you walk in, they say, "Where would you like to be seated, smoking or no smoking?" And we're just as proud, put me in the no smoking section, I'm a moral, upright person. So, so they take you and they walk you through the smoking section, get you to the no smoking section, and you're sitting over there, just as proud that you walked through there. But nonetheless, we're over there in the no smoking section, and many times when you get there, you can see the smoke. Sometimes the smoke is just like, it just knows where you are and it just comes over. Other times you may not be able to discern it until later. I don't know if you've ever gone home, taken off your clothes. A day or so later, you pick up that outfit and you go, "Oh my goodness, where'd that smell come from?" That was back there in the no smoking section where we got it from. But interestingly, have you ever seen this happen? Have you ever seen smoke rise up off of a person's cigarette, cigar, pipe, or whatever they smoke? Have you ever seen it lift up, come toward the no smoking section? Read the sign, no smoking. And say, "I'm not allowed in there. That's the no smoking section." And then go back the other way. Have you ever seen smoke do that? Does smoke respect the sign, no smoking? See, smoke only knows one thing. It penetrates, it goes, it lands, it makes dirty. And that's what the Bible calls the spirit of the world. Hey, see, the spirit of the world could care less that sign says Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses. You call yourself a Christian. Who whoop-de-doo. They could care less about that. All they know is do your thing under the influence of the devil. And we can't escape this spirit of the world because we work with people who are full of it. We go to school with people who are full of it. When we listen to music on the radio, it's there. You turn on the TV, it's present. It's sort of impossible to avoid it. So the only thing that you can possibly do is fight against it. You can avoid the snare of independent thinking by fighting against it. But the devil is bent on getting people to try to go against what God tells them not to do. Well, how can you resist this snare? We have two suggestions that will help anybody who wants to avoid coming under the devil's trap. Here's the first suggestion. We have to see this world around us and those who are in harmony with it for what they truly are. And what they truly are is a wicked system that deserves to be destroyed. If you see this world any other way, the devil's already got you. See this world around us and those who are in harmony with it for what they truly are, a wicked system that deserves to be destroyed. Notice what the Bible says in the book of Ephesians chapter 4 with regard to the way we should see this system. And I hope that all of us see this when we think about the world around us, when we look at the attitudes and actions of mankind in general. Notice Ephesians chapter 4, verse 17. This was Paul's description. Remember we read about these people in Romans chapter 1. Well, in Ephesians, he writes some more about the people of the world. And he says in verse 17, "This therefore I say and bear witness to in the Lord, that you no longer go on walking just as the nations also walk in the unprofitableness of their minds, while they are in darkness mentally and alienated from the life that belongs to God, because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the insensibility of their hearts. Having come to be past all moral sense, they gave themselves over to loose conduct, to work uncleanness of every sort with greediness." Friends, is that what you see? Do you see people past all moral sense? Do you see people alienated from the life that belongs to God? Do you see people walking in the unprofitableness of their minds, in darkness mentally? If you don't see it, the devil he's got you. Some tend to see this world through rose-colored glasses. In other words, when it's not affecting them directly, they may even believe it's not that bad. It's not that bad. I had a man tell me this not long ago, and sir, I want to smack him. This man told me, I was talking to him about the world and the conditions. This man had the nerve to say to me, life is what you make out of it. Now, I looked at him in his nice little home there, and maybe life was what he made out of it. But tell that to the little boy born blind over in another country with one leg. Tell that to people who lost all of their possessions and that in the hurricane. Tell that to people who've got cancer or got this or got that. Tell them life is what you make out of. I want to just smack him. He was so ignorant. But see, it wasn't affecting him at the moment. So it wasn't that bad. And sometimes that thinking can rub off on a Christian. True story. One of the brothers approached me after this discussion. He says, "Brother Mallet," he said, "I'm going to tell you this." He said, "The devil had me for a minute." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "I was actually praying to Jehovah, not just hoping, praying to Jehovah that Armageddon wouldn't come until after I turned 16 so I could get my driver's license." Now I said, now let me make sure I understand what you're saying to me. You wanted heart disease and cancer and crime and murder and rape and child molestation, and you wanted all of that stuff to just keep going so you could get a license and drive down the road. He said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, the devil had you all messed up, boy. He had you hoping and wishing for something. Why would you want this world to go on?" See, but it wasn't really affecting him at the moment, so it wasn't that bad. It could happen to us in the sense that, well, we got the kids out now. And sometimes, that's just like the biggest thing. Just get them out. And now they're on their own, and I can do some stuff now. I can travel maybe. I've always wanted to have a pool table. I've been wanting a big screen in there. And not that it's necessarily anything wrong, but if the idea is now I can do some stuff in the world, the devil's already got you. It's a vile, wicked system. And if we're kind of hoping that it don't come so I can get some stuff done, see, he's already beginning to work on our mind. He's making it attractive to not think like God thinks. Don't let it happen, friends. Don't see this world through rose-colored glasses. If we are, take them off. See it. It's an ugly, nasty world. And we're telling people, you got to get out of this thing so Jehovah can destroy it and we can get about paradise. See it for what it is. The second thing that will certainly help us never to fall into Satan's snare is to maintain the right attitude about our service to God. This is where Eve really dropped the ball. We have to maintain the right attitude about our service to God. What is the right attitude about serving God? It's mentioned in the book of 1 John chapter 5. Would you turn there with me? 1 John chapter 5, verse 3. And notice the command first, what he says about if we love God. It's obvious that Eve didn't love God, and she obviously didn't love her husband, and it's obvious that her husband didn't love God, because both of them threw God's commandments aside. And verse 3 states, this is what the love of God means, that we observe his commandments. But now, what's the attitude about his commandments? You see that next. And yet his commandments are not burdensome. So if you're beginning to feel burdened in your service to Jehovah, then something's wrong. Because the commandments of Jehovah aren't burdensome. Look at it from this standpoint. If you're beginning to feel burdened, when you were coming into the truth, you couldn't wait to get in here. Coming out of that world, and we started going to meetings, and we started going out in the ministry, and we started reading and studying and praying. And my question is, well, what's changed? See, Jehovah's commandments have stayed the same. It wasn't a burden to come in. So if it's gotten to be a burden now, it must be something else that's causing the burden. See, people fail to realize that the devil is so tricky. He will make you work every day, and he'll work you. And then on one of the days that we got to go to a meeting, we don't go every day. But on one of the days we go to a meeting, we got to go to another one. It wasn't the meeting. It's what he did to you all day at work. But he makes you feel like it's the meeting. When here it is, Jehovah God is lightening the load on his people. How many remember when to get an assembly, you had to go 8 days to get an assembly at one time? Now we can do it in 3 days. Who remembers when you had a circuit assembly, you was in there, it was, you never know when you was going home. Same thing with the watchtower. Who remember the watchtower said the brothers supposed to have an hour? They just talked till they got through. But see, we don't do that anymore. If we're feeling burdened today, understand it's work. It's the pressure of the world. And so Jehovah gives us his commandments. Go to the meetings. Preach the good news. What did he say about those there in verse 4? Everything that's been born from God conquers the world. That's why he makes us go to the meeting. That's why he tells us to preach the good news, so we can just get out of the world for a minute. But boy, if we're starting to feel burdened by it, then something's wrong, and we need to make the adjustment. If something's making you feel that coming to the hall is a burden, you better find out what it is. If something's making you feel like preaching the good news is too much for you, you better find out what it is. Because the devil is using that to try to make not serving God seem attractive, just like he did to Eve back in the garden. Those two things. See this world for what it is. It's ugly. It's nasty. Who wants to be a part of that? And second, God's commandments are designed to help us, not burden us down. So if we're feeling burdened, where's the problem? Well, friends, I can't answer how you're doing as individuals, although I've been with many of you this week. You seem like you're doing well with Jehovah's arrangement. But I can tell you how you're doing as a group, as a congregation. I'm very, very proud of the Hayden congregation. You've shown some major improvement in theocratic activity in very key areas. For example, every one of your meetings improved in average attendance. Every one of them. And I'm proud of you for that, because that's what we had you working on when I was here last. But the book study, for example, when we were here last time was 82% in average. Now that's up to 90%. The public meeting, it was under 100%. It was at 96. Now it's 109%. See, friends are coming here. And the congregation, you still have 109, no, 9, 10, 11, 12. Brother Page told me to add 3. So you have 112 active publishers with your congregation. That's outstanding. I really appreciate that. 2 new publishers started since we were here last. 4 persons were reactivated in the ministry. That's excellent. 2 got baptized. I was happy to see that. The congregation's hour average went from 7.8 to 8.8, which means you're spending on average 1 hour more in the ministry than when I was here before. Return visit average is nice. Is at 3.8 for the whole congregation. 5.5 magazines, 0.4 Bible study average, which is above the national average. Now, I know these are just numbers to you, but understand that these numbers show that collectively you've gotten a sense of what Jehovah's talking about. You're determined to do his work. You're determined to keep right thinking in your head and not let the devil pull you into this idea that if you're independent of God, somehow you're going to do better. So I want to commend you and say keep up the good work. One thing that I think you can focus on just a little bit more, some of in the congregation, is interesting that even with this number, you still overall are doing well, but individually think about it. For example, I noted that 13 individuals have not made a return visit in 6 months or longer. Another 33 miss months. That is, they may make a return visit 1 month and they go 3 or 4 months without one. But if I look at 33 plus 13, that's 46. That's about 42% of the congregation. That's not really that active in the return visit work. Could you make it your business, if you're going to be out in the ministry, to try your best to get back and see people? And as we talk with the auxiliary pioneers about, if for some reason you can't get back there, could you arrange for somebody else to go when people show some interest in the good news? So you see if we can show some little improvement in that particular area, because you're already at 3.8, you might as well say 4 return visits, which is good. But imagine if we could get that other 42% going in there, then that number would shoot right up. So we're going to ask you to try to focus on that as a group. But Hayden, Jehovah has to be proud of what you're doing. And I say to you, keep up the good work. Keep the devil away from you. In fact, how do we wrap up this talk? I thought a nice scripture to conclude with was 1 Peter chapter 5. Let's conclude with this text. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. Scripture we know very well. But in connection with the devil, notice what Peter tells us in verse 8. He says to us, keep your senses. Be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking to devour someone. But take your stand against him, solid in the faith, knowing that the same things in the way of sufferings are being accomplished in the entire association of your brothers in the world. Be watchful, he says. Keep your senses. He's out there. Your adversary, he called them. And it's interesting that Peter now likens the devil to a roaring lion seeking to devour someone. We don't want you to think of him as a serpent and Eden anymore. That was Eve's observation. She thought it was something intriguing, and he was able to use it. But he says, no, what the devil is like in our time is a roaring lion seeking to devour someone. Now, someone may question, what does he mean? Because think about it. You've seen the Discovery Channel, right? And you know when lions want to hunt, the last thing they do is roar. You start roaring, you scare everything away. So what does he mean that Satan is like a roaring lion seeking to devour someone? Well, they found this out. Sometimes these old lions get on the prowl looking for something to eat, and they wander up on a farm. And you know what farmers do with their animals at night to protect them, because they know there are wolves and lions and things out there. They put them in pens. They pin them up. The lion walks up on it. There's a whole flock of sheep, but there's a barrier. How do you get them out of there? It has been observed that that lion, in some cases, will take that big old head of his, and they got a big head, males in particular, and they put that big head down toward the ground, and they roar right into the ground. Hope we didn't scare nobody's children. Yeah. But see, what happens is when he does that, the vibrations go into the ground and it starts to shake. And inside the pen, it may seem like the walls are just coming apart. Do you know some animals have been known to bust out, stampede out of the corral because they thought they were in danger. But once they bust out of the pen, guess what happens? See, then the one he wants, that's the one he can try to chase down. It's interesting that they do that. Well, friends, that's the way he sort of wants us to see the devil. See, you're in your pen. You're in Jehovah's arrangement, solid in the faith. But see, the devil's making noise, and he wants you to get frantic and think, if I go out here, I'll do better out there. I can make up my own mind. It'll be okay. I know the brother said, but... He says, no, you take your stand solid in the faith. Don't let the vibrations of the devil cause you to panic and get frantic and think that somehow by abandoning God's way you're going to do better, or that somehow abandoning God's way is oppressive to us, restricting us from something that's going to make us happy when nothing can be further from the truth. So my hope and prayer for each and every one of you, as well as for myself, is that we will always be aware of the devil's tactics, that we will never let him seduce, charm, allure, or make it seem attractive to be independent of God in our thinking. Brothers, if we apply the two suggestions given, see the world for what it is. If you see it, you don't want to go out there. 2, keep the right attitude about serving God. You'll never fall into that trap. So may Jehovah God bless you and keep you safe as you continue to avoid the snare of independent thinking. It's hot up here on this platform, but